Imagine a child sitting in a classroom, staring at a board, waiting for a bell to ring. They have no idea that for 99% of human history, that classroom didn't exist. That bell didn't exist. That teacher at the front didn't exist, and yet our ancestors thrived. They taught languages, skills, which plants would kill you, and how to track animals across vast lands.
This was the original curriculum, a direct transfer of knowledge essential for staying alive in the wild.
So when did humans actually start educating themselves? It wasn't when we built schools. That's the easy question. The harder one is, when did the first human decide that what they knew was worth passing on? The earliest evidence of intentional knowledge transfer doesn't come from a building or a written record. It comes from tools. Stone tools dating back over 1.5 million years show something truly remarkable.
Not just the tools themselves, but their refinement across generations, showing a clear progression of skill.
Chilean hand axe found across Africa, Europe, and Asia shows a consistency of design over hundreds of thousands of years. It could only have been replicated through direct teaching. Someone watched someone make one, then made one themselves. For over 1 million years, the same tool was made the same way because the knowledge was deliberately passed on.
This is what education looked like for most of human existence. Not a classroom, but a demonstration.
A child watching an adult's hands, copying, failing, trying again, being corrected not with words, but with a repositioning. Around 300,000 years ago, when Homo sapiens first appeared, groups lived in bands of 15 to 50 people. The elders were the library. If you wanted to know which plants were safe during a drought, you asked the elder. Knowledge was stored in people, and when those people died, it died with them, unless it had been passed on through story. She found that 81% of nighttime conversation around the fire was storytelling, myths, and ancestor tales. Moral lessons wrapped in narrative. This was the original curriculum, a voice in the dark carrying information forward. Chimpanzees become nutritionally self-sufficient within a few years of weaning. Humans take 18 years.
Evolutionary biologists argue this isn't a flaw, it's the design. The extended human childhood exists as a window for learning.
Humans learn to accumulate knowledge across generations and build something no other species ever built: culture that compounds. What that education produced is visible in the archaeological record, around 100,000 years ago at Blombos Cave in South Africa.
The presence of these specific pigments alongside the beads changes how we view their trade networks.
The ochre had been ground, mixed, and stored in abalone shells. The shells had been carefully pierced. These weren't accidents.
They were the products of a process that had to be learned, practiced, and remembered across generations. The knowledge of how to make them had to come from somewhere. Someone passed it on. Then, around 36,000 years ago at Chauvet Cave in France, someone painted horses, lions, and rhinoceroses on stone walls, and did it with perspective, depth, and anatomical accuracy that took modern researchers by surprise when the cave was discovered. What we can say is that whoever made those paintings had clearly spent time developing that skill. Skills that sophisticated don't appear fully formed. They accumulate through practice, through observation, through being around others. The knowledge existed in the community before it existed in the individual. That is education, even without a name for it. Then around 10,000 years ago, agriculture changed everything. Humans stopped moving and started farming. Populations grew, complexity grew. A farmer needed to understand soil and seasons. A trader needed to count and calculate. When the volume of information exceeded what memory alone could carry,
humans invented writing. And writing changed education permanently. For the first time, knowledge could exist outside of a human being.
It could be stored, copied, outlive the person who created it. The first formal school in recorded history appeared in Mesopotamia.
The Sumerians called it the Eduba, House of Tablets. Archaeologists excavating Nippur found tens of thousands of clay tablets.
The same signs copied over and over, calculations, vocabulary lists, the homework of children who lived 4,500 years ago. Students entered before the age of 10 and graduated roughly 12 years later, having learned cuneiform script, mathematics, and agricultural science. But these schools weren't built for curiosity. They were built for bureaucracy. The Sumerian Empire needed scribes,
but specialists who could record trade, manage temples, and run the machinery of the first cities. Education had become a tool of the state.
That shift, from learning what you needed to survive to learning what the system needed you to know, is one we're still living inside today. Notice the fluting along the shaft and the simple capital at the top. This is the hallmark of the Doric style.
He had spent his life in the streets of Athens using systematic questioning, the Socratic method, that forced people to examine what they actually knew. His student Plato, shaken by that execution, founded the Academy in Athens in 387 BCE.
Not because they were useful to an administrator, but because they were essential to understanding reality.
He had spent his life in the streets of Athens using systematic questioning, the Socratic method, that forced people to examine what they actually knew. Aristotle arrived at 17, stayed 20 years, and later founded the Lyceum, where he systematized virtually every branch of knowledge that existed.
The academic disciplines we still use carry the structure he gave them. The very word academy comes from Plato's school. The idea that the goal of education is to develop minds, not just produce workers, born in a park outside Athens among a handful of people. Universities followed. The University of Bologna, founded in 1088, is the oldest continuously operating university in the world. Oxford followed around 1096, Paris around 1150. Then the printing press in 1440 made books cheap enough for people who weren't kings or monks. Ideas spread faster than any teacher could travel. Mass literacy became necessary.
Prussia introduced compulsory state education in 1763. England followed in 1870. Now step back and look at the full distance. 4 completely different worlds. 4 completely different ideas about what education is for.
Here is the thing worth sitting with. For most of human history, education was not a building you went to. It was a relationship between someone who knew something and someone who needed to know it. The child watching the elder, the apprentice watching the craftsman, the student watching Socrates in the marketplace. The institution came later. The relationship came first. We built classrooms to make education scalable, to standardize what gets passed down. And in doing that, we solved one problem and created another. We can now educate billions, but most of them spend their entire childhood sitting in rooms being told what to know. For 300,000 years, children learned because they had to, because the knowledge was immediately connected to staying alive. The child who didn't learn which mushrooms were poisonous didn't get a bad grade. They got something worse. We replaced that urgency with a system. The system works. It just works differently from anything that came before it.
The fire is still burning. We just moved it indoors, put it behind glass, and scheduled it for 45 minutes on Tuesdays. Education is a powerful tool, but we must remember its origins and its purpose.
It started with a simple desire to share knowledge, to ensure the survival of the next generation.
It evolved into a complex system, a way to organize society and pass on the wisdom of the ages.
It was a way to understand reality, to question, to explore, to grow. And it became a way to standardize, to control, to prepare for the future. We are the product of all these systems, a mixture of survival, bureaucracy, understanding, and compliance. But the fire is still there, waiting to be rekindled, waiting to be shared. The future of education is not in the classroom, but in the relationship between those who know and those who need to know. It's in the curiosity, the questioning, the exploration, the growth. It's in the connection, the sharing, the understanding, the humanity. The fire is still burning. We just need to remember how to share it. The future of education is in our hands, in our relationships, in our stories. The fire is still burning. Let's keep it that way.